We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
G'day and welcome to another live recording of the Mankind podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is in fact more than one way to be a man. And today we are diving into a topic that's often overlooked but urgently needed, and that is male loneliness, especially how it's showing up in Gen Z. Now we're seeing a generation more digitally connected than ever, yet increasingly isolated, anxious, and unsure of how to form deep, sustaining relationships, especially young men. So to help us understand the roots of this crisis and what we can do about it, we're joined by Dr. Tiffany Bartell, a licensed professional counselor, national speaker, and expert in individual and organizational well-being. Her work across communities and industries gives her a unique lens on how this issue is unfolding and what we can do to reverse the tide. And not only is she a dear friend, but she's also a part of our committee that's putting together the Impact Where Men Connect event here in Chattanooga on June 7th in Miller Park. So I have the distinct pleasure to welcome you finally onto the show, Tiffany.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with your listeners. I love what you do with the show, and really excited about the event we have coming up. It was amazing last year, and it's going to be even more impactful this year.
It absolutely is. Now I'm going to make sure to have links to our other podcast interviews on your show.
Yes.
So two interviews that we had together that were a lot of fun. We definitely stood on some skinny branches together, which is what this is all about. You know, we can't tiptoe around many of these issues.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, if we're not talking about it and working on it, nothing changes.
Mm-hmm. Bingo. Absolutely. So I want to get straight into people want to talk about the symptoms a lot when it comes to male loneliness. People want to blame the red pill community, the incel community. They want to, highlight men and boys behaving badly.
Yeah.
And we can get our rocks off doing that all day, because I think it's easy to channel negative emotions and our internal frustrations onto what we're seeing outside of ourselves. But that can only get us so far. What are you seeing are the underlying societal or psychological issues or challenges or shifts that you believe are contributing to this rise in male loneliness?
Well, I love this conversation because I remember when I was coming into being a counselor many years ago, and one of the first clients that I had was a college student, male college student. I was working with the university at the time, and it just became very apparent very early that there was no path that had been laid for him to be able to do the kind of work he needed to do in order to be healthy and happy. There was so much depression, so much anxiety, and he wasn't isolated in his life. He had lots of friends and family, but he was so lonely in his emotions and his experience. And as I've been working with Gen Z, doing research with Gen Z, I think, keeps hitting on this point again and again, that it's really easy for older generations to look at it and say, oh, it's their phones, it's this, it's that. And that's so blaming. I think it's a way of psychologically distancing ourselves from the issue and not really sitting with them in their suffering, figuring out what's contributing and what can we do to help. And so I'm always a big fan of conversations where we're saying, how can we be helpful, rather than what are they doing wrong that's, causing their own problem for themselves.
Well, and the rich part of this is, older generations have such short memories, because when they were coming up, I mean, I'm not one to point fingers at boomers, but hey, sure. Boomers, you bra burners. Yeah. Your sure. Revolution, sexual revolution, right? Mm-hmm. And so there, you had your own revolution, you had your own challenges, you Absolutely. Had your own unique opportunities, and I think the same credence and credit needs to be given to the next generations that come up.
I agree. And, one of the areas of my, nerdy research work that I like to do is, this idea of like generational values. And it's very easy for us to judge past and future, generations based on our own values from our generation. And I'm kind of a essentialist a little bit. I find that that's not productive. What I'd rather do instead is, as a therapist and as an advocate, let's find out how to sit alongside these populations and understand what their world looks like. So I think that, getting back to your question on where is it coming from, what's happening, I think there's a lot of factors that go into this. First there is COVID. They went through COVID and the isolation and the disruption there, and also the anxiety. But then remembering too that this generation has dealt with constant recessions and global terrorism and all these things that I didn't experience when I was a child. I didn't have social media. I didn't know what was going on in the world at any given time. I also didn't know what everyone thought of me, even strangers, on every single day of my life.
Yeah.
And so it's really an apples and oranges thing. So I think when we step back and we say, let's honor the fact that they're growing up in a different world, having a different experience with challenges we've never faced. I think we can come in with a lot of humility and compassion to the conversation.
That compassion is so key, right? Because that helps us kind of soften the blow when we try and communicate and try and get to that level of shared understanding and meaning. You spoke before about the values, generational values, and we talk a lot on the show about values, and my general understanding of how they show up in my life is they color the lens in which I look at the world.
Absolutely.
Kind of from my own values. And so what would you say are the values of Gen Z, more broadly speaking, and then where they may conflict with perhaps more traditional or older values?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting because if we actually look at the research, it can tend to challenge some of the biases that we have towards Gen Zs. And I think that, we could talk about bias with men or, towards men for hours on end. But, the intersectionality there creates like a really tight spot, I think, for Gen Z males to sit in. And so we know that Gen Z, they're innovative. They value work-life balance. They're very informed. They're critical thinkers, which is really interesting when I work in higher ed and they're like, this generation doesn't critically think. I think they critically think earlier and more than any generation we've seen before, and the science proves it.
Wow.
Yeah. And so when we're frustrated that they won't take that job in that toxic work environment and work for no money because they're like, that's not a healthy way to live, whereas our generation or mine, I'm a little older than you, might have been raised to, work whatever job comes and doesn't matter. Like you work because you work. That kind of, that sandpaper can rub a little bit, but I think that there's so much that's, exciting and new. I think it's the best generation yet. They're very concerned about social justice advocacy. They're really concerned about things that are affecting people that they're not a part of that group. It doesn't affect their daily life. And they want others to live well and to live without suffering. And I think that's a beautiful thing too. But it can be pathologized by like other, generations and other adults, where it's like, why do you care about that? Like, care about your own life, care about like, what are you going to do tomorrow? Fix your life versus worrying about what's happening in another country to people you've never met. And so I think we do see that generational clash. And I was actually in Hawaii giving a presentation in January, and it was higher education. So a lot of people from different universities, and we were talking about these generational differences, and somebody raised their hand and said, I'm realizing right now that, my generation, Gen X, values like creativity and, like kind of like pushing the boundaries and trying new things. And that's part of the frustration I think I'm having when I have Gen Z college students who are like, I want to see a rubric. What are the expectations? What exactly do you want? And she was perceiving that as a weakness or a lack of maturity. And whereas Gen Z wants to meet expectations, understand clearly, what's happening and make a decision from there.
Yeah.
And so I think with all good advocacy work, we have to know where we are first and what our intersectionality is personally before we can work with someone from a different spot.
Mm. I love that, because that comes back to a big central message of this show and our organization, which is do your work.
Yeah.
Like, understand where your biases come from, understand where your judgments come from.
Yeah.
Because I mean, even I myself, like, millennials, it wasn't the smoothest ride for us either. A lot of finger
Absolutely
pointing
Yeah.
came to millennials, but I can catch myself having those same judgments on these next generation coming up, and
Yeah.
it's a good catch.
It is.
Yeah. So this is really interesting to see that, Gen Z they're not just going to take your word for it. Even if
No,
you
I love
have
that. Yeah.
even if you have PhD or you're in a position of authority, they're not just going to take your word for it, which is interesting to go, okay, eat your broccoli. Why?
Yeah.
Well, it has, this much calcium, this much protein, this much, these micronutrients and blah, blah, blah. Like, they want to know those things to give them so that they can validate, oh, this is time well spent or energy well spent, which is really interesting, because I wonder how that's going to shift things societally for this society as this next generation gets older.
Yeah.
Because how many of us were just fed that the Vietnam War was a just war, right?
Sure.
That we believed those narratives that came from mainstream media and such, and that we bought into the war in the Middle East, and
Right.
and in retrospect now realize that it wasn't a just cause for everything we did there. So how's this generation going to be swayed perhaps by, okay, if I say the powers that be, my tinfoil hat cinches on a little bit, but people in positions of influence and power aren't going to be able to conduct them like they've been able to do previous generations.
And I think we're already seeing it, not to get into politics or anything, but I think we're already seeing that in the last 5 years, where people, from this generation are really having a voice and creating spaces for their voice. I think the world has never stood a better chance than they do now with this generation coming into adulthood. And I think too, when we cultivate that positive perspective, then we're able to get some work done. And for my line of work, I think that's really helpful. And so, part of my work is in, doing therapy and counseling and organizational wellness. The other part is I'm a counselor educator. And so working with, my counselors in training, thinking about like, how can you be helpful to people? How can you serve well? And part of that is, that unconditional positive regard and that positive view of human nature. We have to hold hope for our clients. But I think that, outside the clinical setting, holding hope for humanity is also really important.
You spoke in the beginning about, the young men that you were working with, they didn't feel like they had a path.
Yeah.
And I want to look at that from another angle. Perhaps society gave them a path that just doesn't fit. And so if we look at the man box, which we bring up a lot, but if this is your first time listening, the man box essentially was coined in the 80s as the unspoken, unwritten rules of what it means to be a man. And we as boys learn that on the playground, generally speaking, in Western cultures and beyond, learn by the age of 5. Even earlier, we know the rules. Don't be a girl. Don't be a sissy. Don't be weak. Be in charge. Take the lead. Don't cry. Whether it's learnt on the playground or learnt at home, these are the cultural messages of what it means to be a man. And that message almost in a way gets etched into our psyche as if it's in stone. And it's very hard to unlearn that form of masculinity. And so on this show, we don't use the phrase toxic masculinity, because I believe the phrase in itself inherently is toxic. But I love how Dr. Brennan Kwiatkowski, who joined us, he's a psychologist in Canada, uses the frame restrictive masculinity, which I love. It paints a much clearer picture. It gives you very narrow options of how to show up as a boy or a man. And so I want to see is there a line that you can draw between the dissatisfaction, the disenfranchisement, the depression and anxiety that you're seeing in younger men, which is resulting in loneliness. how much of a relation is there to that cultural narrative and expectation of how they need to show up as a man based on where they
Oh,
are?
I mean, I think the data is really clear. Gen Z and millennial males in America are the loneliest people. Gallup did a poll and found that 25% of the Gen Z and millennial men, compared to 18% of women of the same age brackets, were experiencing loneliness. And one of the reasons that they put out was this idea of societal norms. And so I have a couple of ideas. You asked before, what's kind of feeding into this loneliness epidemic that the Surgeon General talked about, right? And I think a lot of that is kind of COVID, social media, but I wonder if part of it is this awakening that we're having of talking about mental health and destigmatizing mental health. And there's so many spaces where people are talking about it. And there's young men and boys who are looking at it being like, okay, so what space do I get to talk about it? Like where do I talk about my feelings? And where are the lines? What are the rules?
Yeah.
Like when do I cross a line? And as a female, I take responsibility for how women participate in maybe creating like an updated man box where, sometimes we talk about like how, these alpha male, like stereotypical, expectations can be placed from men to men. And I've seen that in my work where, fathers will tell sons it's selfish to cry. Like we take care of the women. You don't tell your wife, you don't tell your kids when you're struggling. You take care of it yourself because you're taking care of everyone else. And so they grow up feeling guilty if they have emotions. But I have so many young males, especially at college age, where it'll be their girlfriend that sends them to therapy and is like, you need to like figure some stuff out for us to work. And they're like, I don't know what I'm here for, but I guess I have stuff to work on. And then they start to have more vocabulary and they start to express themselves, and it's not always received well.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't fit the idea that the women in their life or the other people in their life kind of had for what it would look like. Like I wanted you to be really attuned to my feelings. I wanted you to be really emotionally intelligent in reflecting when I'm feeling something. But wait a minute, you're angry? Or wait a minute, you're crying? Like, what's that? And so I think that they're getting a lot of mixed messages of, we need to talk about mental health. We need to like talk about our feelings. We need to like debrief. And they're like, cool, where and how? Like, where is that going to be safe for me?
What's up, everyone? I used to think that burnout was part of the deal. Run hard, crash harder, rinse and repeat. My afternoons were a total drop-off zone, but ever since I started taking Magic Mind, those 2 p.m. crashes are gone. I take one little green bottle each morning, and that steady focus carries me through the full day, whether I'm knocking out podcast edits, chasing my kid around the backyard, or getting ready for my work. Now, what I love is that it's not hype. It's built on 12 active ingredients, each one chosen for a reason. Now, this isn't a quick fix. It's part of my long-term rhythm now. So if you want to get your hands on this powerhouse of a little shot here, head to magicmind.com and use the code MANKINDMAY for 20% off your first order. That's magicmind.com and use the code MANKINDMAY when you check out for 20% off your first order. When you support our sponsors, you support our show, and trust me, you will not regret getting your hands on this stuff.
That's been a lot of my experience in relationship has been, I'm 9 years, give or take, into men's work now. And that's a lot of men's circles, and I'm still unpacking and still learning and still unlearning things. And what I found in a lot of my, especially previous relationships, was I got a lot of great tools to be able to hold space.
Yeah.
But that holding of space I didn't always feel reciprocated. It felt like a nuisance, or I could even sense that my partner's sexual interest in me was going down.
Interesting.
If I were to cry, if I were to, be in a low spot, and, low spots for me are usually like 48 hours. It's deep, it's horrible. And then I'm out. I'm a quick one. I'm a quick purger, but it's messy. It's ugly crying, snot nose, like the whole thing.
Absolutely.
And I could notice a change. Whereas like in my current, in my marriage, it's celebrated that I go there, and I appreciate that so much that I can go there. Because but there is that argument that you hear from a lot of men that are experiencing that lack of connection, and they find themselves in places like red pill communities, or they find themselves in places, following people like Andrew Tate and such, where they have this idea that, and some of it, I don't want to use the word justified, but informed. These ideas can be informed by...
It's understandable, right? People want belonging, and people want community. And if we as a society are just, bombarding them with messages of like, you need community, you need people, you need your tribe, you need this. They're like, okay, I'm supposed to go find a tribe. I'm supposed to go find a community. I obviously don't know how to be a man. So like, who's talking about it? Who's telling men like what to do?
It's the most vocal people, like Andrew Tate, that start off with messages like, take responsibility for your life, be accountable, follow through on what you're going to do, get in shape, start making money, work on your career. So all these surface level positive messages, but then the underlying misogyny and sexism and dangerous language starts to kick in beneath that.
And then you can't really be vulnerable, right?
Yes.
You can't really, because there's
that
implicit blame of if you aren't feeling successful, or if you aren't hitting all your marks, or if you're struggling, you must not be doing something correctly. And that's just not how life works.
No.
We go through rough times, and everybody has struggles. And the more that you try to pretend that you're not, you link back to that loneliness, you link back to that isolation. And we know how dangerous it is. It's not just bad for your mental health, it's actually bad for your physical health.
Yeah.
Increased cardiovascular disease, increased, issues with cognitive function, decreased memory, decreased learning, decreased immune system, premature death. It's serious.
Yeah. Well, let's throw this not so fun fact out there, that isolation and loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Yes. Which is why, I feel like these conversations are so crucial, it is killing our men. And I'm a wife and a mom of an 18-year-old son. This is relevant in my personal life and professional life. And even if it wasn't, in society, we should care about things that are creating unnecessary suffering in those around us.
Yeah. I want to circle around to the kind of conversations that we need to start having, or can start having. But before we do, let's kind of close the loop on emotional expression. However, one can close a loop on emotional expression. But we've spoken about the need and the importance, and we've also spoken about the inherent risks of doing that. Because I knew in high school. So here's a really interesting story. My dad, did the Mankind Project's New Warrior training when I was 9. It was like the rebuilding and renewal of our relationship. It was incredible. But all of a sudden, he's coming home saying, crying's important. Let your emotions out. This is, and I'm like, cool, Dad, got it. You're my hero. I'll do whatever you say. And then I go to my all-boy private school where rugby is religion, and I express those emotions. Well, that then turned into bullying. It turned into, punches to the stomach. It turned into... it wasn't received that way. So I ended up in this weird dichotomy, and you might be able to call me a big emotion kid, right? When it rained, it poured in a lot of ways. And that was dangerous in 9th grade.
Absolutely.
Surrounded by a bunch of hormonal kids who physically matured way before I did as well. And so it was really hard, because I felt this desire to emote and to purge and to share, but it wasn't received by my male friends. Now, where did I find that connection? I found it in my female friends.
Okay. Yeah.
Which felt great, But then it then brings in the other element of confusion was I had sexual attraction
Sure.
to some of these people that I was building friendships with. And that was not reciprocated in a way. And the story I was telling myself is because I had, been friend zoned or whatever. Right. This is all the lens of a 16-year-old. Let me just give that context.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But as a 16-year-old with hormones, with needs, with desires, and also with that cultural narrative of I need to be putting notches on the headboard in order to be valuable or seen as valuable amongst my peers. Very, very messy time of life in trying to figure things out. Perhaps a necessary experience to learn and try on different things. And I'm not trying to say that people don't need to go through that kind of messy experience of discovering themselves, but there weren't any clear messages of what it meant for me to express emotions, in a safe, healthy way.
Yeah.
And where to find those spaces where it could be received.
Right. That it was safe and you wouldn't get hurt for being vulnerable.
Yeah.
I think in my work, one thing that I do try to do is be really honest about when, men are doing their work, being really honest about not all parts of your community are going to receive this in a way that's actually helpful. And so, there's going to be a place in your life where you're an advocate for change. And then how can we create spaces or find spaces where you can be you and get poured into? And because time and time again, I've met with, Gen Z males and said, okay, who else knows in your life that this is happening for you? And the answer 9 times out of 10 is no one. No one. That's why I'm here to tell you. But telling a therapist isn't enough. You need someone in your world, because I'm not in your world. I'm on the outside. You need someone in your world that sees you fully. And I think that there's so much work to do to help more people do that work and to know the work is possible. And then to find those places to connect and find that other person. And sometimes it's a matter of, doing our own ego work and doing our own trauma work. And then being that person who's okay, this other person is so impactful in my life and I'm so close to them that I'm going to work on this relationship to make it into a safe relationship. And I've seen that happen too, where someone will say, this is my best friend since childhood. Nobody knows me better than this person. So I'm going to have my heart open, but also have my wisdom and my self-awareness with me too, to go in and to say I need someone to talk to, and this is how I'm feeling. And if they say and do things that are not helpful or hurtful, to be okay, hey, that response didn't feel good. And you're my person. You're my best friend. Get with it. Come on. This is a normal conversation for people to be having. Yeah. And if you think about it, we really do that in other relationships. Think about your romantic relationships where, your partner will say something and you respond one way and they're that didn't feel good. I didn't like that. And you work it out and you find a way to be supportive that feels good.
Yeah.
Why would we not do that in our platonic relationships? Why would we not normalize people aren't good at providing the specific support you want if you won't teach them what you need?
You got to advocate for it, right? And
absolutely.
I found that so helpful to front load conversations like that. My wife and I do it all the time.
Oh, same.
She'll be I need to stress. This is a stress reducing conversation. I just need you to listen. I don't need advice, no solutions. I just need to talk out loud, which, finally, and I'm years into learning about, active listening and stuff. It's still
there's so much to say.
So much to say. But being able to advocate for that kind of support is so important. And, you talk about having that person in your life that you can go to. Are you familiar with Niobe Way and her work? She wrote a book called The Connection Crisis and another book called Deep Secrets. And it talks about how in early childhood, we have these friends that you can tell anything to. And they interviewed these kids and these kids said, like, oh, my best friend, Ben, I can tell him everything. I love him. You know,
Yeah.
I can tell him things I can't tell my parents. And
Mm,
then they get to a certain age where they interview them again and they're like, tell me about Ben. Oh yeah, he's still my best friend. Well, last time you said that you loved him. Oh no, it can't. No, he's just my friend, you know, he's just whatever. And there's the beginning of this kind of separation
yeah.
and
And protection. It's
protection.
self-protective.
Oh,
Yeah.
I said, I mean, I remember when my best mate in my street, you know, I heard my dad start to say to his friends, love you, man, or whatever. And I remember my best mate, Ben, on my street, I told him, I said, oh, I love you, man. I was like, what, 9? And the first thing he said, he was like, oh, that's gay.
Okay.
And I just shut down. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, it's like our friendship, the ceiling was just built then, or the floor was just built because we couldn't go any deeper from that point, because it was like, ouch, oh, wow. Like I took a risk and it was thrown back at me. And I want to start getting into community and the impact of community here in a second. But just to say, now in my life, I know that when ish hits the fan, like I got 3 people,
Yeah.
3 a.m. friends I know that I can call. And if I don't get the first one, I'll likely get the second one. If in the event I can't get the 2 of them, I'm almost definitely going to get the third one on the phone. If not immediately, in a short period of time. And having that kind of support is so invaluable.
Yeah.
To go, dude, I am struggling, or I'm way too hooked right now, or you know, my wife and I just had a massive fight, and my nervous system is freaking out.
Yeah.
And they know how to hold me in that space, and it feels so good. The hug that I get from a brother, is so different than the hug I get from my wife.
Yeah. And you need both.
You need both. Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Well, and I think you see it in females as well, where, you know, I'm one of those people who will tell people that I love them, and doesn't feel disingenuous or trivial. Like I say it when I mean it, and you don't have to say it back. And it's interesting to kind of note the reactions the first time you say it to somebody that you're building a relationship with, and what happens for them. But I do think that, like, again, you had to work to create those 3 people.
Yes.
And you had to work on yourself.
Bingo.
To be that. And, you know, as we segue into community, I think one of the most important things to keep in mind, because we are who we are. And when we feel powerless or helpless, we tend to like act out of like, you know, our trauma or our pain or our unresolved garbage, right? Like the stuff that we haven't quite sorted. And one of the ways we can avoid that is by saying, like, in order to be in community, I need to be a good citizen. In order to have quality friendships, I need to be a good friend. And that means, like, you know, when my ego comes up or when my insecurities come up, have I done enough work that I'm self-aware and I know how to work through those things, and I'm not speaking out of that and acting out of that? Because when we feel those pokes of the man box, right, it's usually because something came up. So you told your best mate that you love them, and he was like, that wasn't like a genuine reaction. That was something, some kind of ideology, some kind of fear, some kind of anxiety. And so, you know, part of the work in building community is asking yourself, really, and I do this frequently, look in the mirror and say, am I a good citizen of my community? You know, do I show up for others in the way that I want them to show up for me? Am I answering the phone at 3 a.m. for other people the way I want them to answer for me? Because I tell my clients all the time, if you're carrying a heavy load and your friend's carrying a heavy load, the impulse can be to be like, oh, they have too much. I don't want to share what's going on with me.
Wow.
But if you share 10% of what's going on with you with a friend, it lands as like 5% because it's not theirs, it's yours. And if they share back, you each walk away a little bit lighter. And then also having a sense of like, I'm helpful to someone else. I'm giving to someone else. I matter. They matter. We can do this together, and I'm not alone. And they're not alone either.
This can be its own episode. What we're talking about right now. This could be a series of what we're talking about, because yes, there is something in our brain too that I know there's a reward system that kicks in from giving. Like that, it releases a lot of happy chemicals from giving. And so this is not to suggest like, oh, go and pour from your empty cup into the world. Sure. It's like, no, it's just little bits here and there where you can start to
give a drop. If all you have is 2 drops, give 1 drop.
Give 1 drop. I love that. Yeah. I love that, because, the law of reciprocity, I believe, comes around, right? Especially if the intentions are, are good. And I love that. And that's a big reason why, on a Tuesday night that I could be with my family, I'm at men's group.
Yeah.
Hosting men's
part
group.
Of the way that you stay a good dad and you stay a good husband is by being a community and like keeping the other areas of your life healthy. And what we know about loneliness in the brain is that long-term effects are the brain starts to like detect misinformed social threats. So the longer that we're lonely, the more likely we are to misinterpret or negatively interpret. The Gottmans talk about negative sentiment override with our partners, where we tend to like get into this negative mindset. And so whatever they say, whatever they do, we just interpret it negatively. Well, a lonely brain can do that too.
Yeah.
Where, you wave at somebody and maybe they didn't see you, or maybe they're having a bad day and you're like, they hate me. Or maybe like nobody's called you to make plans. But if you weren't feeling really lonely, you'd be like, if I don't have plans, I should call someone else to make plans. But your brain's like, no one called me because no one wants to spend time with me. I'm alone.
Right.
I have no one. There's nothing I can do about it.
Okay.
And so sometimes we have to use our self-awareness and our mindfulness to kind of think outside of our own thoughts and to say, okay, really the feeling of loneliness is supposed to be adaptive. It's supposed to be your brain letting you know you've been alone too long. And then we're supposed to be like, oh, just like hunger tells you to eat, loneliness tells you like, I should make a connection. But especially in this country, when we feel lonely, we're going to get ice cream. We're going to watch sad movies. We're going to listen to sad music. We're going to isolate further and further. We'll probably disrupt our sleep hygiene. We're probably not going to go to the gym. We're going to doom scroll, all the things that remove us farther and farther, which is really counterintuitive. So if we can listen to our brain and say, okay, when I feel this way and I feel alone, first of all, let me check it. Where is this coming from? And then secondly, like, how can I feed that part of myself that's hungry right now?
Shout out to Common House Chattanooga. I just renewed my membership after a 2-year hiatus after my daughter was born, because I said to my wife, because I'm working, just about full time now, it's like, I got to get out of the house, because those signals were going off big time. And even if I don't talk to anyone here, I'm recording in studio, by the way, but
you're around people.
Yeah, I'm around people, and that I feed off that. I feel that. Just that's one thing I noticed about the pandemic was being masked up. I realized how much I smile at people, and how them smiling back is like a drip for a drip, in a way.
Oh yeah, those mirror neurons. Like, yeah, it feels good.
Bingo, those mirror neurons. Bingo. So, I want to look at. Let's talk about community, because I want to look at this from 2 lenses. One, if for the listener who is experiencing that loneliness, and 2, as someone who knows someone who's experiencing loneliness, so that we can support in the best way possible. So there is no denying the impact of one-to-one therapy, counseling, coaching, doing the deep work in an intimate setting. Very powerful. But there's also no denying the power of a peer support network in helping, whether directly or indirectly with that work. So directly could be like a men's group, like we do at MKP, but indirectly could be a social group, a club. Yeah. And so for this year, a hobby. So for this year, for our men's mental health event, the theme is around community and bringing great communities in Chattanooga together in one place, so that people have options. They can go, I want to join the beer brewing group. Yeah, I want to join the trivia group, or the D&D league, or the car club, or whatever.
The ice buddies.
The ice buddies. Yeah, exactly. The cold plunging community. So it creates those options. So how would you recommend someone begin that first step? If they are perhaps so ingrained in this habitual loop of doom scrolling, staying at home, Uber Eats, porn, whatever, is giving them quick, easy rewards and not giving them enough of that adaptive nudge to get out and build community.
I love that. So I always go back to the idea of behavioral activation. So we use behavioral activation in the clinical setting a lot for like depression, anxiety, things like that. So the idea is the worse you feel, the less you do. So the worse you feel, so the less you do. So the worse you feel, and that downward spiral. So when we're thinking of unwinding the spiral, maybe you've felt lonely for a while or sad for a while. There's so many transplants in Chattanooga. So maybe you've lived here for a year and you haven't found your people because it's really hard to find your people as an adult. So I always encourage clients to ask themselves, what's the smallest, easiest, most accessible thing for me to try? I'm not going to marry it. I'm just going to try it. And so maybe it would be just coming to the event on June 7th and just talk to someone at a table, talk to someone at 3 tables, and then say, okay, in the next month, once a week, I'm going to eat a place I haven't eaten at before, or go to a place try something. And if I hate it, I'm an adult. I got a car, I'll leave, if it's not my thing. But just saying, okay, what would be the easiest, smallest lift for myself? Because what you get is when you do something for yourself, you get a little emotional energy. And then you have that energy to do a little more and a little more. And we start to unwind that spiral. And so I would say, what's the smallest, easiest lift for you? And maybe it's a little easier if you take somebody and you say to someone like, hey, I want to go to this thing. I don't know anybody there. Would you go with me? We'll just go for an hour. It'll be fine. We'll go for 30 minutes. And then maybe you get there, and after 30 minutes, you look at your watch and it's not so bad. We'll just listen to 2 more songs, or we'll just check out 2 more booths. And so I think that's a very kind and compassionate way to say, I want to build a new life. We're so all or nothing, especially in America, where we're like, I'm going to be healthy and I'll just throw out everything in my fridge, everything in my cupboard. And it's so punitive. It's so violent. It's very aggressive, and it's not sustainable. And so from my perspective,
my wife is laughing as she listens to this, because that is so me. I get so intense.
Yeah. Well, it's so much easier to be black or white than it is to be balanced. But black or white gets back to those rules, and the rules already weren't serving you. If they were working, then fine, do them, but they're not working. So why would you do more of that?
Yeah.
So instead, thinking of what if I approach my life with curiosity and said, what are my available options? I'll try things. The Chattery has 10,000 different classes. If you want to knit, if you want to be a social justice advocate, if you want to do improv, if you want to learn how to make martinis, go and sit next to someone you never met before and just be with people and feel how that feels.
So it's not that there's a lack of resources in let's just say here in the States, or here in this community. Is so hard. It's just the first step. Hard. Yeah. So hard. And I think we need to honor that. And so, getting to your other point of what if you love someone who's lonely? I would say, we so often look at someone else's issue and the solution seems so easy. But the bridge between feeling stuck and taking the first step is empathy. And I train my counselors in training to do this. You must listen, you must validate all those active listening skills. You have to do all that before you get the right to make one suggestion or suggest one action. That person must feel that you understand and where they're at and what they feel is valid for them to listen to one thing you have to say. Otherwise, it's punitive and shaming. And it feels like you don't get it. Yeah. And as we know, as we've all likely experienced, that shame is not a productive emotion, in my opinion. Yeah,
it's paralyzing, and it's going to push them farther in. So saying I'm going to go to this event, and I'd like someone to go with me. Yeah. Would you go with me?
A piece of advice that I have heard shared, which I know I'll get to one day as a parent, is especially for the parents out there or the partners, is perhaps the thing that they're interested in that's the lowest hanging fruit for them to get out of that loneliness is not your interest. It's not something you're keen on. But how can you jump into it too? How can you get involved in it, even if it's not your thing, just to show that you're there?
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah. I mean, I have an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old. The amount of hours that I have spent doing things I don't care about is like uncountable. I also have a husband whose brain works so different than mine. But, my friends will make fun of me because I'll go to anything.
Yeah.
Like anything. Running of the Chihuahuas? Yes. I love dogs. I'll go to, they had an Edgar Allan Poe, act come through town. And I was like, sure, why not? Kind of forgot how dark it was, but it was fine. Like learn how to make your own fettuccine. I'm in. If somebody's there that I care about, I'm there with them because I care about them. And I think that's something we have to like challenge in this individualist, society.
Yeah.
Is this idea of like, oh, I don't want to, because that's not my favorite thing to do. Who cares? Who cares if it's your favorite thing to do? Is that your favorite person?
Yeah.
Or is that their favorite thing to do? Could you come alongside and be curious about like, what do they like about it? How could it be interesting? And so just to kind of like broaden our mind. So your temporal parietal junction is that part of the brain that deals with like creativity and empathy. It gives you the ability to think about the thoughts of other people, think about the feelings of other people. And I think it's underused so much of the time. But what we know is that regular mindfulness practices can actually increase the gray matter in that part of the brain. So as we get healthier, as we do our own work, it shouldn't make us aggressive in getting other people to think like we think and to do what we do and to be there for us. It should make us more connected and more caring and more empathetic and more invested in others as well. Otherwise, you're not going to be happy.
Tiffany, I have to make you a regular guest on this show. You are absolutely brilliant, and I love your perspective and take on things. And it's also really important to me, and I know to the listeners, to have a female perspective as well of the issues that are, impacting the lives of men too, because it's great having advocates on this side of the gender cube in a way, sure. But to have others advocating as well is really important, because you go to companies, there aren't employee resource groups for men that are struggling, right? But there are multiple for other identified groups, which is fantastic. But why? There's councils for women and girls in the US government, but there isn't a council for men and boys.
Yeah. And
the issues impacting us. And so all this to say, this isn't a zero-sum game.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
All needs are important and need to be addressed. And we have some really dire pressing ones on our hands right now that you and I and our organizing team are looking to at least take some drips away from in our community, or give some drips to in our community, because, that's the cool thing about living in a big town in a small city is, you can do something on a macro level and see the micro impact. So I'm excited.
That's beautiful. Well, and I think, like you said, paying attention to men's mental health isn't at any other area of mental health. It is integral and part of increasing the overall well-being of your community. You impact men's mental health and you impact child mental health. What we know right now is that happiness used to be in a U. So you start off really happy as a child, you experience some dips, and then you kind of go back up. The first leg is flattening. Our children aren't happy. And I think that is a travesty.
Yeah.
And so you impact men's mental health, you impact child mental health. You impact men's mental health, you impact maternal mental health. Like, it all is part of the same thing, and it's not a competition. It's hitting the problem at every single angle for maximum impact.
Well said. Well said. Well, I am so excited for you listeners out there, just like we did last year. I'm so excited to record the event and report back on how it goes because we're still feeling the impacts of last year's event. And so we're just growing from here, and it's just compound interest at this point. The more community we bring together, the more people we get on board to this message. And if you have listened to this episode and you are at this point hearing these words come out of my mouth, you are becoming a part of the solution. So I want to thank you for being with us in this conversation. Tiffany, I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience. How can people find out more about you if they want to follow you and your work?
That's so gracious of you and generous. And I would say too, as a Chattanooga resident, if you're listening to this podcast and you don't live in Chattanooga, Chattanooga welcomes you for the day. Come in, drive in, fly in. We welcome you to the event. So I have a podcast called How Would You Rate Your Pain? And I'm on Instagram at The Happy Therapist. And if you want to learn more about what I do in organizational wellness, the company is Be Well Consulting.
You are a happy therapist. That's like the best, most clear branding ever.
Thank you. I enjoy what I do. It's good work. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Brandon.
Absolutely. And of course, the greatest thanks goes to you, the listener, who shows up each and every week to prove that there is in fact more than one way to be a man. What do you say, Tiffany? Have we proved that today?
I think we have.
I know we have. Lots of love, and we'll see you next week.
This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. We have been your host, Boyson Hodgson, and myself, Brandon Clift, and we want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. If you want to find out more about today's guests and support them in their mission, you can find links to them in the show notes. Now, if you have found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, we are always grateful for a rating and review of the show on iTunes. Now, above all else, we've got to thank you, the listener. Because through your attention and your support, you have made it possible for us to let men all over the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if something in this episode has touched you, then perhaps it is the call to action to get involved in men's work. With live trainings happening constantly and in-person trainings happening all over the world, the Mankind Project definitely has something for you. Now, if you've enjoyed the music in this episode and all of our episodes, be sure to check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. And lastly, just know, what it means to me to be a man is completely different than what it means for you. That is the beauty of this journey. So if you are looking for guidance, support, and community as you begin to unpack and dive deeper into your men's work journey, then you know where to find us. Same place, same time, next week. Lots of love. We'll see you then.
Hey, it's Boyson here with the Mankind Podcast. We are closing in on 100 5-star reviews of this podcast, and we have a goal. Brandon and I want to get to 250 5-star reviews. So help us out, will you? Please? Go to the Mankind Podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a review. Thank you. Hey, it's Boyson. On the Mankind Podcast, we've brought some incredible guests on to talk about the importance of doing the work to improve our mental and emotional health. And here's the truth. Multiple times over the last 25 years, I've had the help of one-on-one work with some amazing therapists. For me, for my wife, for both of us as adoptive parents, and for our kids. The Mankind Project and Men's Group, though awesome, are not a substitute for professional mental health support. And so I'm thrilled that the Mankind Podcast now has BetterHelp as a sponsor for the show. BetterHelp works online. It asks you what you're working on and then matches you for live one-on-one sessions with a licensed therapist, someone trained to work with you, listen, and offer helpful insights. I'm using BetterHelp. It's super easy, and I like what I'm getting. If getting one-on-one support in the comfort of your own space feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to the link in the show notes or betterhelp.com/mankind. And if you sign up, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy.